Welcome to the Turing School interviews on local public services, a series of online meetings with experts to discuss the regulation and market of services and to better understand what is happening in this particular period where COVID-19 pandemic has determined an important reorganization of many sectors and markets. Today we're going to discuss about the water sector in particular with Christian Minelli, head of WAREG Secretariat. Hi Christian, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you, Monica. Thank you, the Turing School.
So the first thing that I would like to ask you is if you could outline us how the water sector has been impacted by this virus and what happened and which have been the main reaction insofar.
Yes, well, the COVID-19 crisis has changed the life of consumers and utilities in the past 3 months. Lockdown measures worldwide have lessened the intensity of many economic activities with a strong negative impact on employment and productivity. Consumers, especially the most vulnerable categories, are now facing growing difficulties in paying water bills, for instance. And the rate of default payment may have increased in many countries. Additionally, we can expect a reduction in water consumption by industrial and commercial usages following the closure of many plants and also of the closure of activities in the tertiary sector, like bars, restaurants, and others. And this does not seem to be compensated by the slightly increase in domestic consumption by households during their confinement at home. Well, if we had possible increasing costs for companies related to emergency protocols and automation to protect the workforce, we can easily get an idea of the tensions that water companies have had to face recently. According to several studies, in the US alone, for instance, public wastewater services, public wastewater utilities asked for $12.5 billion in economic relief to offset revenue loss. In late April, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development created a vital infrastructure support program to support utilities and protect the continuity of services in 38 countries, such as Greece, with its loss of tourism-related revenues. So the pressure from consumers to receive financial aid and also from water utilities to relax, to ease regulatory measures has therefore been very high in the past weeks.
Okay. So I would like to ask you, as you know, our main focus is on the regulation. So I would like to ask you a bit more about what has been the reaction of the regulator to this new situation, and if the traditional instruments that were used have been able to cope with the new scenario, and or if there has been the need for an overhaul of the instruments, and in particular, if you can describe us the European situation, and I know that in Italy there's been a particular instruments that have been used.
Absolutely. Well, at European level, first of all, the general trends in regulators' responses have been monitored since the beginning of this crisis at the end of February by WAREG, the Association of 31 national and regional authorities that overview the water sector in Europe. In general, we observed a shift towards a more flexible set of rules for regulated companies, combined with a strengthened consumer protection. The main reactions of economic regulators around Europe, if I can say, may be grouped into 5 big categories of measures. First of all, customer protection against the financial crisis. And in particular, there was, in general, in many European countries, a generalized suspension of procedures to shut off water supply for default payments, and also the possibility for them to pay water bills by installments. And this is particularly helpful for vulnerable categories of customers. And it has a good impact on the affordability to pay and on the possibility to keep water bills the payment of water bills constant in the next months. A second broad category of measures is more related to extensions of terms and exemptions for regulated entities or regulated companies in order to take account of the increased difficulty of operators in meeting their targets due to these unforeseen external conditions. Then there's a third category of measures, which is more related to the coverage of operators' financial shortages stemming from these extraordinary consumer protection measures that affect, again, the revenues of companies. In some cases, specific funds were created through tariffs and state subsidies to cover part of the urgent expenses needed by water companies to address the COVID-19 pandemic. Then there's a fourth category of measures, which is related to the coverage of operators' economic losses, again stemming from the extraordinary consumer protection measures taken by regulators and the extra costs incurred. In particular, there may be a reprioritization of business plans for water investments in some countries. And finally, there is a cooperation between governments and regulators to provide a stimulus for the economic recovery through levers that can boost investments. We should remind, in fact, that water services are typically capital intensive, and investment generate a high economic impact on the areas that are served, because many local and national firms are involved in the realization of such investments. Consider, for instance, engineering companies, construction firms, plumbers, IT companies, and so on. So in order to mitigate this specific impact, several regulators have been coordinating with governments and asking to introduce by law some measures that could provide stimulus to the economic growth in general for the next months.
Thank you for this answer. And our last question is quite complicated from a certain point of view, because we are asking you if you can somehow envisage what will happen in the future of this step. So if the new trend or the new measure adopted are going to continue to be implemented, or if we are going back to another situation, the previous situation, in order to consumption.
This is a very important question. From the regulatory perspective, many regulators are asking this question right now. However, it is very difficult to imagine what the future situation will be in the water sector until the end of the year. What we know today is that almost all regulatory agencies in Europe had a very quick reaction in the first 2 weeks after the outbreak of the COVID-19 crisis in their own country. And that they were mainly concerned with the continuity of water supply and the continuity of the planned investments in order to ensure access to universal access to good quality water services, at least in Europe. The situation might be even more stressful in less developed countries, I believe. And this is why European regulators adopted urgent actions for instance, by implementing specific measures to protect vulnerable customers, or by easing regulatory rules to reduce the stress on water utilities, and by coordinating with governments, like I was saying. However, many regulatory agencies around Europe do not yet have a clear picture of the impact of the crisis. Since, first of all, because they are missing the data from the sector, considering that the workforce in many companies, in many water companies, is reduced, and that monitoring of those water companies' activities cannot be done on site right now because of health safety measures. And the collection of data and KPIs on water services for tariff purposes are postponed almost everywhere. So we may have a clearer picture by the end of the year once these data are available. We have to consider also that we are not sure whether there will be a surge in the pandemic in autumn. And even if at this stage we can say we are more prepared to tackle with it. What we can observe is that any possible modifications in tariffs will most likely be temporarily freezed in many European countries because of all these uncertainties. But I believe that tariffs will not be absolutely enough to tackle the economic and financial tensions on the sector. Well, first of all, because if we should use tariffs for that purposes, we may risk to have an increase in tariffs, which is difficult to justify before consumers. And additionally, because this is a policy issue where state subsidies and international transfer may have a very important role.
It seems difficult today to envisage what will happen, but I would like to thank you for giving us this information, and maybe we will contact you later in this year to know what has happened. And but insofar, thank you very much for being with us, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.